Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes.
I am super excited to announce that my first children's book, Love Magic, is now on Amazon for purchase. Love Magic is a heartfelt and magical story about the enduring power of love. It's about a little girl named Charlie who has a loved one who passes, and her journey addresses the universal question of how do we stay connected with our loved ones when they pass on. It gently touches upon the magical ways in which our loved ones can continue to guide us through nature, music, love, and everything in between. I hope you will check it out on Amazon and possibly purchase it. And if you do, please leave me a review. Without further ado, let's go to the next interview. Today, I am honored to have Dr. Rebecca Valla on the show. Dr. Valla is a psychiatrist who practices from a holistic perspective. She has come to see spiritual growth and psychological healing as interconnected. Her emphasis is on learning to heal your inner child and to love yourself and others in this order. She has been active with the International Association for Near-Death Studies organization, presenting talks on self-love. She'll be co-presenting a workshop at the upcoming virtual IANDS conference, which is September 1st through the 5th. And you'll be presenting, what will you be presenting there, Rebecca?
I'm doing a workshop with David McGinley, who's a chaplain.
Yes.
Also an experiencer himself. And we're going to also do a presentation. So the workshop is more kind of hands-on exercise and so forth. And then presentation is a bit more theoretical, but it's about doing your work with your ego. Nice. And it's called Your Ego is Your Homework.
Yes, that title is great. I love it. And you can find her YouTube on the IANDS website, and this will all be on the show notes at the end. And we'll talk about that a little bit again at the end of the interview. So welcome to the program, Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah, really good to be here, Marla.
It's so great to have you. So let's just jump right in and tell me a little bit about your journey as a child and how it has brought you to your work today as a psychiatrist who's exploring not only the continuity of consciousness, but reincarnation, near-death experiences, inner child work. So just share a little bit about that with us.
Well, I believe that we make our contracts with people before we come to this lifetime. I didn't know it, of course, in my childhood. It's taken me many years to understand it. But I was born into a large family. I was the sixth of 7 children. And there were just so many dysfunctional aspects to my family. They were part of a brethren group, what's called the Plymouth Brethren, which is a kind of a cultish, fundamentalist Christian church that is really isolated from others. It doesn't, if we had lived in community with the brethren, things might have gone differently, but they don't live in a separate kind of community. They have, everyone's living intermingled in the world. But a lot of restrictions, really not allowed to socialize with people who are not in that sect. Really very confusing and difficult to be a child in that environment. I didn't know, there weren't other kids in my school who were part of the brethren. So there was a lot of sense of not belonging, and being sort of exempted from sort of normal childhood, just in that aspect. And there were all kinds of restrictions. We couldn't have a television. We couldn't go to movies. We couldn't have birthday parties. It just kind of went on and on. But then in addition, there was a lot of dysfunction in my family, and my father was a rageaholic, and he was not an addict. He was hugely damaged from his own childhood. And, none of us had what we needed, but, some of us had, were sort of singled out to be abused, and, and I was just one of them. And very confusing. It's taken me a long time to understand why me, and to now to understand that there were great advantages in that I had, of course, no awareness of. So how I survived were a couple of things. I had a couple of older siblings, older, like 12 years older, who were loving parent figures, and provided a certain amount of safety. They couldn't protect me, but there was a feeling that that they would do what they could, and that was very positive and very helpful. I also, in terms of the religious background, I went my own way with my spirituality at an extremely young age. And so for me, it was very important for me to know Jesus. Like, I knew Jesus, like he was my personal friend. He was the father figure for me. And just the pictures of Jesus with the children around him, and the Bible verses about Jesus loves the little children, and the songs, that meant everything to me. That was a lifeline to me. And I felt like, in a way, I felt like I belonged more to God, as I understood God and Jesus, than I did to my parents. And so that was very helpful to kind of have that sort of strong knowing. It was a knowing that I had. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about this. It's not like someone reinforced it for me. But it was really helpful nonetheless. And I had a certain, these are things that we come in with, I had a certain sort of defiant part of me that was, I belong to God, and I am going to do in this life what God directs me to do. And that was very helpful and very strong when I was, 4 years old.
Interesting. Did you, if I could interject for just a second?
Yeah.
First of all, was Jesus a part of the brethren?
Oh, yes. It's a Christian denomination.
Right.
But there wasn't much emphasis on Jesus. It was much more Old Testament.
Right.
The emphasis was on being in the world, but the world is corrupt. And the idea was you have to somehow rise above, be in the world, but not of the world. That's one of the scriptures that was always talked about.
So when did you start exploring this continuity of consciousness and knowing that there's more, and really digging into the inner child work? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the inner child work didn't come, I would say it didn't come into real focus for me until I was in my 50s. Because I was clearly doing work that was related to inner child healing. I was talking about my life, my childhood, my a lot of insecurity and doubt about basically being able to trust enough that I could be open in the world, because I just spent so much of all of my development in a more defensive, protective, I call it living undercover. And I think a lot of children who grow up in unsafe environments know what that means. It's that
Yes.
you can't be yourself. It's not safe.
Right.
You can't share very openly what you might be feeling or thinking, because it certainly was not safe for me. And I knew that, and I had to, that was like number one, the survival, is number one.
Right.
So when I started going into therapy and worked with an analyst initially, there was a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack, and and he was kind of a tough guy. He was, you can't do anything about it. It's over and done. You gotta put your life together, and it's almost like not take it personally. Which is,
Wow.
it's good, and it's good advice, but it takes work
Yes.
to do that, to not, and to really kind of move beyond a lot of what you carry. There's a lot of burden. There's a lot of trauma burden
Right.
that is carried. So it wasn't until I was already a psychiatrist and working with patients and continuing at times to have therapy help along the way. I was in my 50s, and I had started doing energy healing work.
Interesting. How'd you
And
get
that
involved?
is when things came together for me.
Interesting. So energy work, how did you get involved in that? Because probably when you first started psychiatry, or even when you started energy work, it wasn't, let's say, as popular as it is today. People didn't probably even know what it was. So how'd you get involved in that?
Well, it was about 15 years ago. So I
Oh,
was,
okay.
I was pretty far along in my
Right.
own growth and my own reading. I had done a lot of reading. I was, aware of near-death experience and reincarnation and all kinds of things. I mean, if I have any kind of psychic gift, I would say it's a knowing. I have knowing about truth, and I've been a seeker of truth ever since I came here.
Yeah.
And it was part of my survival to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So no, so I had a person who was recommended to me by a friend of mine who had seen her and had some training with her. And I just had confidence in her being somebody who really knew what she was doing. And I went to her, and, she very soon said, well, you have more inner child healing work to do. And I was like, I've been talking about this with therapists, and, and I've been reading, and I don't understand. How come I haven't gotten there yet? Right. And she
Right,
was like,
right.
oh, well, um, there's a whole piece left to do about self-love. And you can't get to self-love without the healing of your child self. I mean, that's the way to get to self-love.
Yeah.
Because if you still carry a brokenness about yourself, where you feel like you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're not what someone expected you to be, you could spend your whole life proving, that you're lovable, but doesn't mean that you're going to feel lovable.
Right.
And
So how do you work? I know your goal in working with clients is to help them discover their life purpose in a state of wholeness and self-love. So what kind of things do you do with your clients to help them explore that?
well, when I take a history, I'm very focused on people's development,
Mhm.
what happened to them in their childhood,
Right.
and where are they in looking at that. Are they making excuses? Are they trying to minimize? Are they trying to deny it or block it? How much work have they already done? Um, and then I just try to tell them the truth, that I see them as not having a good connection with their child self. And their child self has been left alone by them, as well as by all the other people who didn't, attend to the child and honor the child and cherish the child. And they have to be able to learn to do that. And of course, people feel like, well, I can't do it. I don't know how. Nobody's ever treated me that way. So how am I going to treat myself that way?
Mhm.
And that's a very honest question. And, the answer is, where there's a will, there's a way. You have to first have the intention and know that this has to be done and not be sort of like reluctant. It's hard, it's painful. And that's why it hasn't happened, because we have lots of ways to sort of resist and distract and not do it. But this is doing your work. This is doing your work. And if you don't have a background of being in an unhappy home life, if you've been more or less well cared for and attended to and praised and reassured and all the things that children need along the way, then what else is unattended to? Did you have a loss that you've not resolved?
Mm-hmm.
Did someone leave and you weren't prepared for their leaving? And so there's a grief process that was never completed. That's often the big work that's waiting. Sometimes there was just a really destructive sibling relationship, and that has been very damaging. And the parents didn't attend to it or didn't really understand it or whatever. And that is a big healing work that is waiting to be done. And usually there's a way you can track, I say following the thread back from wherever a person is and their pain and their confusion. A lot of people are just generally confused about why they're not happy or have more joy. Life hasn't fallen sort of into place for them. And a lot of times people are in their 50s because they've gotten, which is something that I say in my video about self-love.
Yes.
That's very common. And it was in my case, right? I had done work since I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I did the most, fundamental healing work that freed me for the life that I was here, the purpose I was here for.
It was interesting when I was probably in my early 50s. I remember going to a therapist and it was just like, you can ask me anything, but don't ask me about my childhood.
Yeah, right.
I've been there and done that so many times.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But of course, now I know much different.
Right.
So how in the world did you, so you're the psychiatrist, MD, and someone walks into your office and you bring together your integrative approach, reincarnation, inner child work, near-death experiences, what we've learned from them, the wisdom, which is just so profound. How does this weave all together to help a person have more self-love?
Well, not everybody is on board with all these things, right? So, and I'm not in a position to try to convert people and say, well, first of all, you need to understand that, reincarnation is a true thing. And, that people are where they are. So I try to join them where they are, of course, with empathy, and then with some explanation that people who've hurt them can't necessarily be blamed in a sense. I mean, yes, they were hurt, and that's the reality. But people can't give what they don't have.
Right.
And so many people in their 50s or so are saying, my parents had bad childhoods. They didn't, they were struggling. They weren't wanted, or there was a lot of abuse, or there was addiction problems. Times were really hard. And so, I don't think they really meant to be so dysfunctional and hurtful to me. And that's all helpful and true, if it's true. But that doesn't do the job of self-love.
Right.
You have to get to what is it that was done to you and what is it that is needed, because you need to become the loving parent that you needed when you were growing up and that you didn't have.
Right.
And that's the work. That's the work. And so you have to buy in to what was done to you. And if you don't really know what was done to you, and a lot of people say, well, I don't really remember. I just know it was really hard, or, I had a lot of abuse of one kind or another, neglect of one kind or another. Well, let's talk about what exactly was done to you. What was it that was done to you? How did it go when you were a child? What are your earliest memories? What have you been told by relatives, siblings? How can you put together a story about what your childhood was like? And then we'll go from there. And in the process, as you connect to your experience, you will likely start to have body memories and you will become tearful. That is what we need to follow.
Right.
And I always encourage them, if they can find energy therapy, that will be helpful because that will facilitate them getting in touch with what in their body, where is it in their body? What are they holding in their body? And with the heart, because ultimately our heart self is our true, authentic self. We have to connect there at the heart level. And, you can learn all about your childhood from the neck up. And you can say, oh, I understand all that happened to me. And what now what? Well, understanding is only the very beginning, just the beginning. That's not where the healing is coming from. It's got to come from your heart.
So where does joyfulness and playfulness and those sorts of things come in? Because I can imagine that you encourage clients to bring, and for my listeners who are thinking, wow, it's really true. I need some help. But when you take it on that other side, what's helpful to people when dealing with these past traumas in terms of doing things they can that can make them more joyous and remember the innocence of maybe a young child or something like that?
Well, our joy is in our child. Our joy is in our authentic self. And I think of the authentic self as being about 5 years old, 4 to 5 years old.
Right.
And, people who do energy healing work that's related to child development, and there's a school of that energy healing. It's called the Barbara Brennan School. But people who do that will say, well, we have younger selves. We have baby selves and toddler selves. And, but a lot of times people just can't relate to that. They don't remember, or they never were told, what your life was like when you were a baby, when you were a toddler. And so that, for me, I have memories that go way back, and I have siblings that can tell me because they were all around about what was going on in the family when I was 2 and 3. But I have my own very strong, emotionally laden memories from the time I was 3, 4, 5. And I remember going to kindergarten, and I remember that at the age of 5, I already knew where my family stood in the pecking order of a larger society,
Wow.
which was very low down. And I also was hurting greatly. And so, I've had patients, and I do it at this time. I have patients who are preschool teachers and kindergarten teachers. And if they will, and so many of them are loving people, that's why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
Because they just have a heart for little children. And that is so, so helpful, what they're doing, because they're helping little children to feel, that if they're good, they're loving all the children in their charge. They're telling all the children that they're worthwhile and that they all have something to contribute. And they're not discriminating because of socioeconomic background or race or, there's none of that in these preschool and kindergarten classrooms.
Yeah.
It's that we all belong here. We all belong to each other. We have to learn to be respectful, to appreciate each other, to say words of praise and appreciation, as well as to say things that we don't want, we don't like, and begin to set up boundaries that are appropriate, and to know how to voice that kind of thing. So they're just absolutely so important for the rest of people's lives.
Yeah.
If they have that in their early childhood.
Right. And I think for parents and caregivers, just to be made aware of the importance of course, parents know and caregivers that it's important to validate a child, but I think to let a child really know, truly know in their heart that they're significant
Yeah.
and they are unique and they bring a special quality to this world that no one else can. I think this is a good time to end this part of our conversation. And then next week, Rebecca will be back to talk more to us about her story and her beautiful work. I hope you can join us. Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.